The famous dresses of the queen, embroidered with precious stones, concealed the fact that her body rarely touched water. This was the reality of the Middle Ages, when Europeans suddenly began to fear water. When speaking of Elizabeth I, one envisions the image of a majestic ruler dressed in luxurious garments, with a pearl-white face, a high forehead, and a piercing gaze. However, behind this carefully crafted mask lay a reality that might astonish a modern person. The queen bathed only once a month, regardless of whether it was necessary. Today, such a habit seems unthinkable, but in the 16th century, such hygiene practices were not only unremarkable, but were also seen as a sign of caution and a reasonable approach to health. People of the Renaissance era lived in constant fear of diseases and believed that frequent washing could be harmful to the body. According to the medical beliefs of the time, water opened the pores, allowing deadly miasmas to penetrate the body and spread diseases. Bathing, especially in hot water, was considered a dangerous practice that weakened the body and made it vulnerable to infections. The French physician Théophraste Renaudot wrote in the year 1655 that bathing, except in cases of absolute medical necessity, was not only unnecessary, but also harmful. It filled the head with vapors, weakened the nerves and ligaments. English philosopher Francis Bacon developed a 24-hour bathing method intended to limit the absorption of harmful watery elements. According to his method, the skin was first covered with oil and balm. Then the person spent 2 hours in water, after which they were wrapped in waxed cloth soaked in resin, myrrh, and saffron. This was supposed to seal the pores and strengthen the body weakened by water. After 24 hours, the cloth was removed, and the skin was rubbed with a final layer of oil, salt, and saffron. Although medieval etiquette books recommended washing only the face and hands, personal hygiene remained a delicate subject. In the 17th century, the use of toilet paper was extremely rare. Instead, people used cloth rags, moss, leaves, or even wool. Apart from the fear of epidemics, another reason for the rejection of frequent washing was the disappearance of public baths. In the Middle Ages, bathhouses played an important role in urban life, but with the onset of plague epidemics, they began to close, and over time, the habit of water procedures almost completely vanished. Even among the nobility, bathing became rare. Instead, the belief spread that the best way to maintain cleanliness was by wearing pristine white linen garments. It was thought that a clean shirt absorbed sweat and dirt, replacing contact with water. For this reason, Elizabeth I, like many of her contemporaries, preferred to change her linen regularly rather than undergo full-body washing. The Queen's luxurious dresses concealed the fact that her body rarely came into contact with water. Nevertheless, unlike most of her subjects, the Queen did bathe, though not as often as modern standards might suggest. When Elizabeth took a bath, the process turned into an elaborate ceremony. A large, copper bathtub was specially brought in for her, filled with hot water heated in cauldrons, and infused with aromatic oils and herbal decoctions, which were meant not only to cleanse the skin, but also to protect it from disease. In everyday life, the Queen used damp linen cloths soaked in rosewater or vinegar. Her ladies-in-waiting assisted her, ensuring that her skin remained soft and well-maintained. It is known that for New Year's, the Queen received a gift from her court laundress, Mrs. Twist, 4 cloths for the teeth, meant for cleaning and polishing them. These cloths were made of coarse fabric, stitched with black silk, and trimmed with lace. Her Majesty was also presented with golden toothpicks and a ruby-embellished ear scraper. Between her rare baths, Elizabeth relied on various methods to maintain cleanliness. She wore perfumed gloves to mask unpleasant odors, used dry powders to absorb oil from her face, and regularly cleaned her teeth with fabric strips soaked in vinegar. Her wardrobe included numerous linen undergarments, which she changed quite often, making her, by 16th century standards, a remarkably clean woman compared to other monarchs. For her time, Elizabeth was far from unkempt, especially in comparison to other rulers. Her successor, James I, was rumored to wash only his fingers. French King Henry IV was infamous for his stench, and his son, Louis XIII, inherited this trait and even boasted, "I inherited this from my father. My body smells of sweat." Moreover, her personal hygiene practices were dictated not only by cultural norms, but also by security concerns. English monarchs lived in constant fear of poisoning, and physicians even warned them against simple washing with water of dubious quality. As for the common people, their lives were no less modest. Travel diaries and letters contain many testimonies about daily life, but travelers usually paid more attention to the state of the bedding and the presence of bedbugs than to the availability of washing facilities. English traveler Fynes Morrison, in the year 1592, noted with surprise that in one Eastern European inn, he was offered a bed that was considered clean simply because the last person to sleep in it was a 90-year-old woman. However, of all the cities he visited, only in Lübeck, Gdansk, and Elbląg was he offered water to wash his feet. Travelers who visited the Middle East were amazed by local hygiene standards. Swabian physician Leonhard Rauwolf, who was in Tripoli in the 1570s, described in detail the procedures he underwent at a public bathhouse. First, he was made to sweat, then bathed, and subjected to a vigorous massage, during which the masseur even stood on his shoulder blades. Then a mixture of arsenic, quicklime, and water was applied to his skin to remove hair, after which he was scrubbed with soap foam and a coarse woolen cloth. The final step was the application of a special clay paste, which was supposed to cleanse the hair and stimulate its growth. After the expulsion of the Moors, the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella ordered the destruction of Arab baths, and by the year 1576, Philip II had completely banned their use. Frequent bathing began to be seen as a sign of heretical beliefs. According to legend, Isabella Clara Eugenia, the daughter of Philip II, became famous for a peculiar vow she made during the siege of Ostend in the year 1601. She swore not to change her linen until the siege was lifted. However, the siege lasted for 3 years, 3 months, and 13 days, by which time, as the story goes, her garments had changed color from white to yellow-brown. The English traveler Henry Blount, who visited the Ottoman Empire in the 17th century, was astonished by the hygiene standards in Turkey. He noted that the first thing the Turks did after conquering a city was to build public bathhouses. These bathhouses were state-funded, ensuring that everyone, regardless of gender or social status, could bathe for a symbolic fee. Moreover, those who did not bathe at least 2 to 3 times a week were considered filthy. This contrast in hygiene habits between Christian Europe and the Muslim world was striking. The Spanish authorities, influenced by religious dogma, continued to associate cleanliness with heresy. The Spanish Inquisition even regarded frequent bathing as suspicious behavior, associating it with secret Muslims and Jews who had converted to Christianity but might still practice their old traditions in secret. The concept of personal hygiene in Europe began to change only in the 18th century, particularly in France. Under Louis XV, perfumed hygiene became widespread, and instead of bathing, people masked body odors with powdered wigs, scented gloves, and fragrant pomanders. However, even in the 17th century, the habit of bathing remained rare among European elites. For instance, Louis XIV, known for his grandeur and meticulous control over Versailles court life, was famously averse to bathing. He reportedly bathed only twice in his life, on the advice of his doctors. Instead, he relied on the changing of multiple layers of linen garments to maintain cleanliness. Despite his reluctance to wash, Louis XIV adored perfume. and his court at Versailles became the epicenter of the European perfume industry. At the same time, some parts of Northern and Eastern Europe had different attitudes toward hygiene. In Russia, public steam baths, or banyas, remained popular. Foreign travelers often wrote about Russian bathhouses, describing the practice of intense sweating, followed by immersion in cold water, or even rolling in snow. The Austrian ambassador to Russia, Sigismund von Herberstein, wrote in the 16th century that Russians bathe often and with great pleasure, beating themselves with birch branches in steam rooms. In Sweden and Finland, similar traditions existed with saunas, which also played a major role in everyday hygiene. Unlike Western Europeans, Scandinavians continued the tradition of frequent bathing well into the modern era. Despite this, it took centuries for attitudes toward bathing to change in Western Europe. By the 18th century, scientific advancements in medicine and new discoveries about hygiene gradually altered the perception of water. Physicians began to recommend regular washing, and by the 19th century, with the rise of public sanitation and plumbing, bathing became an essential part of life once more. However, for much of the Middle Ages and the early modern period, water remained an object of fear rather than purification, and rulers such as Elizabeth I, Philip II, and Louis XIV followed the norms of their time, avoiding frequent washing and relying instead on changing clothes, perfumes, and other alternative methods to maintain their appearance of cleanliness.